We are back with another episode of the Do As I Say, Not As I Did podcast, our startup advice show where we answer the real questions about what's going on in your life and in your business. So if you have questions or you're trying to put out fires, send us an email and we'll get it on the show. Send those emails through to podcast@joelditrapani.com. And as always, I hear your complaints. It's a hard email, and that's why I put it in the show notes so you can just copy and paste later. I'm your host, Joel DiTrapani, and today I'm super excited to be joined by David Allen, the best-selling author of Getting Things Done. In this book, David shares the breakthrough methods for stress-free performance that he's introduced to over 2 million people across the globe. His premise is simple. Our productivity is directly proportional to our ability to relax. Only when our minds are clear and our thoughts are organized can we achieve effective productivity and unleash our creative potential. Now, this book has to be one of the most high-impact things I've ever read. I'm obsessed with all things self-help and productivity hacks, etc., etc. But this book still has, in a giant way, shaped my day-to-day, every day of my life. It's something I come back to every year and reread. And the Getting Things Done framework, or the Getting Things Done kind of like halo, is something that I'm in constant pursuit of. I actually have an email template saved in my Gmail, which is my recommendation for this book because I send it out so frequently that I wanted to create a template to just get this out into the world so fast. And on top of that, it is mandatory reading if I hire you into my company, that as soon as you start, you spend your first couple of days reading and implementing this book. So if you have not read this book, you need to. It will change your life both personally and professionally. David is an absolute expert at getting things done and all things real productivity. So let's jump into it. Welcome, mate. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Hey, Joel. Thanks for the invitation. Delighted to be here again.
Well, before we jump into today's challenges, instead of me trying to butcher it, do you mind telling us a little bit more about getting things done?
Well, it's just a set of best practices that I uncovered, discovered, and then objectified about how do you get stuff done with as little effort as possible. I'm the laziest guy you ever met. People think that I'm tight-assed and buttoned down and corporate or whatever, but that's not how people meet me and they go, God, you're nothing like I thought you were going to be. Because I'm relaxed, flexible. I like to be spontaneous, follow my, intuitive hunches about what to do, plan as little as I can get by with. That's how I came up with Getting Things Done. A set of these best practices about how do you get a clear head. Because I discovered the value of a clear head, especially getting a black belt in karate. You don't want, if you jump by 4 people in a dark alley, you don't want 2,000 unprocessed emails hanging around your head. So how do you keep yourself from being distracted so you can be fully present? I mean, these days can become popular, this sort of mindfulness stuff. I learned that 40 years ago, in the martial arts. Focus on your breathing, come present, be there, so that whatever you're doing, you're fully available for that. And so that's really where all this came from. And I just discovered you need to get stuff out of your head, decide what it means, park it in trusted places. You need to appropriately engage with stuff. You don't need to finish everything. You just need to know what your commitments are, park some inventory of that somewhere so that you can review that on a consistent basis and feel good about what you're doing and good about what you're not doing. But you need to know what you're not doing before you can feel good about it. Most people have no clue.
Yeah. And I didn't for a long time, and I would always curse my memory being weak, and that was why I would forget to do stuff. But after implementing your system, and I know my interpretation of the Getting Things Done is that it's not a productivity framework. It's a thinking framework. It's a way to approach life. Is the way I've implemented it.
Yeah, it's a mindset. You're right. How do I approach this email? How do I see? Most of the input we get doesn't tell you what you need to do about it or what it actually means to you. You have to decide that. So it requires this thing that's hard for a lot of people. It's called think.
It's wild how many people don't really think.
Yeah, a lot of people just react. They don't think. So wait a minute. What does this mean to me? What I'm going to do with it? Where do I park a reminder if I can't finish it this very second so that I don't have to keep rethinking about it all the time? A waste of time to have it out twice unless you like the thinking, unless you like what you're thinking about.
So if you haven't read Getting Things Done, as I said, absolutely read it. It is, I can't recommend it highly enough. But my interpretation of it, and so I will have a crack at butchering David's work, but is, anytime you have an idea or a task gets thrown at you, you need to record that. Because if it's in your head and you have an open loop, that will come back to haunt you with stress at some point, most likely all the time. So get everything down into a system, and then have a system which is a place that you will come back to. Because if you just write it on a piece of paper and throw it in the bin, it's effectively going to live in your mind anyway, because you won't come back. But by having a system that you trust and that you can come back to, you can, for the first time, completely let go of all of the stuff that's getting thrown at you. And it gives you time and space to be present in what you're dealing with, whether, that's getting jumped by 4 people in an alleyway, or it's dealing with the fires that are coming up at work. So everything I do, it's become a joke now. It's like, it's got to go into the system. It's got to go into the system. And the system I use is called Omni. So it's become a joke at my company about, everyone says like, yep, put in the Omni, because like gets captured and I come back to it. And so there's so much more nuance in it, and that's a huge butchering of it. But that, I guess, David, have I missed any of the kind of major pillars of it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
And because you don't need time, you need space. You need room in your head. There is no more time. But how much time does it take to have a good idea? 0. How much time does it take to be strategic? 0. How much time does it take to be creative or innovative or just to be present? 0.
Yeah.
Those don't take time, but they require room. If you're distracted, if you've got all that other stuff banging around in your head, the ambient anxiety most people deal with because they haven't captured, clarified, organized, and reviewed all their stuff. It's banging around their head. And your brain has no brain. If your mind actually had a mind, it would only remind you of stuff when you could do something about it. But it'll wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning about shit you can't do anything about. Like, duh. So your mind is a great servant, but it's a terrible master. And most people are letting their mind run them. And they're using their head as an office, and your head's a shitty office. Period. Did not evolve to remember, remind, prioritize, and manage relationships between more than 4 things. That's new cognitive research.
Well, before we jump too much into the cognitive research and I become well out of my depth, we'll jump into today's challenges. So I'm excited to kind of run through these challenges with you, David, to kind of see what you think of them. So this first challenge is called, I'm struggling to manage my time. What methods or strategies have you found to be successful in organizing and prioritizing tasks as a startup founder? How do you maintain focus and balance competing demands on your time, such as managing team members, fundraising, product development? It feels like there's a never-ending list and I just don't know where to start. From April's Smiths. So I felt like this is kind of where I was when I first read your book, David. So when someone is in that stage where they just don't know where to get started, what's the advice you'd give them?
Get started.
That's pretty simple.
Make it bad, come on. And course correct. You just don't want to make the same mistake twice. So get started. And of course, trusting what you're getting started on. That's a whole lot of what my methodology was about. How do I make sure that I can make a trusted choice as opposed to I hope this is right kind of choice? And so, manage time. You can't manage time. You don't mismanage 5 minutes and come up with 6 or 4.5. Time management is a hoax. They call it time management because people who make a lot of money think they need it. And they're a little embarrassed to say, I need help in managing myself. Right?
I like that.
But it's all about how do you manage yourself? How do you manage your focus? And that's a whole lot of what my research was about and all my years of experience with working with thousands and thousands of people, with this methodology is how do I get clear so that I make a better choice out of all my options? But first of all, you got to figure out what all your options are. Very few people know. Very few people have even a clue about what all their options are. They kind of think, well, this is pulling at me. I got this thing pulling at me. I got this thing pulling at me. Well, why don't you sit down and get a list of everything pulling at you? So back to your point, capture everything, little, big, personal, professional, whatever. Get that stuff out of your head because your head has no sense of past or future. It doesn't care. It's all present. It's all stuff banging around in there. So again, your mind evolved to do very sophisticated stuff. It's doing it right now. You're going, that's a microphone, that's a person, this is a computer, whatever, as opposed to vibrations of light and sound, because your brain evolved to take long-term history and pattern recognition. So in the present, you know kind of where you are in space and time and what these things are that are around you. So it does that brilliantly. Computers can barely even start, even with AI and all the new stuff, can barely even start to mimic the sophistication of what your mind learned to do. And that you go to the store for lemons, you come back with 6 things and no lemons.
Yeah.
What happened? Oh, duh. You just tried to use your head as your office. It doesn't work. So what you need to do is to build an office, a second brain, if you will, externalized, so that some part of it's like it's like putting stuff in front of your door so you don't forget it in the morning, right? Well, duh. That's a great strategy. Your brain then doesn't have to remember to remind whatever, because you've set up a systematic way to be reminded of the right stuff in the right time at the right context. Anybody who maintains a calendar or a diary is doing the same thing. If you don't like to write stuff down, then throw away your calendar. Don't be intellectually dishonest. You know, if you think your head can do it, why have a calendar? Oh, well, because I don't want to forget. No kidding. Duh. There's just very few people have really done that across their whole life. So the person, when you felt, and this person who's asking is feeling overwhelmed with all that stuff, get an inventory of all that stuff. Find out exactly what it is, but not just this thing. You need to then start to think about that thing itself. What are you committed to about that? And that's the clarify step. Once you've captured this stuff, you then need to go through the real rigorous thinking process. What does that mean? What am I committed to finish about that? And by the way, what would my next action be if I were going to take it toward getting completion on that open loop? And outcome and action are the zeros and ones of productivity. What are you trying to accomplish? And then how do you allocate or reallocate resources to make that happen? Now, that's pretty simple if you only got one thing to do. But as this person, and you probably can remember, when you have 75 or 30 or 40 different projects and initiatives and things you've allowed yourself to accumulate, then that's where it becomes really, really important that you get that inventory out, and then you make these decisions, these rigorous thinking decisions. Wait a minute, what am I committed to finish about that? This is done when what's true. So if you want to get things done, you have to decide 2 things. What does done mean, and what does doing look like? And I can't tell you how many thousands of hours I have spent literally one-on-one, desk side, with some of the best, brightest, and busiest people on the planet you'd ever meet. Many of these people make more money than I'll ever see in my life. I'd have thought they've figured this stuff out, but no, not true. And, the countless hours I spent having them make these kinds of decisions about, well, what exactly are you going to commit about that email that you're looking at? Why are you letting emails pile up? Do you only take out some of your garbage? Silly. I mean, there's no logic to what most people are trying to do in their head about all that sense. And it's not overwhelmed. If you were overwhelmed, you'd actually deal with it, or better or worse, you'd do something to try to get out of that stress, that trauma. The real issue is what I refer to as ambient anxiety. So the person who's asking that question that you just posed is just dealing with the ambient anxiety, waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh God, what am I going to do about it? Oh Jesus, da, da, da. And that ambient anxiety is what's creating a whole lot of the stress that a lot of people are dealing with. It doesn't mean that life is easy or that you're going to get rid of challenging situations. No, not at all. It's just going to make you a lot clearer about how you deal with it, which one you need to deal with now. So she was asking about, how do I set priorities? Well, I'm going to fast forward and give you the simple answer to that, which is trust your gut or your intuition or your spirit or whatever this still small voice inside of you is that probably has a pretty good idea. But most people have so much ambient anxiety and things banging around in their head, they can't tell the difference between intuition and indigestion. Does it feeling mean I should do that, or is that too much chili I ate for lunch? The only way you're going to know is to get as clear ahead as you can so that you can start to pay attention to that still small voice.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of great advice there. I The only thing that I'll add is, and it's one thing that the book really taught me to do, is that first thing actually is go and read this book. Take 2 days out of your week, because I promise you, you'll get more benefit out of reading that book in the first day and then implementing the book in the second day than making tons of shitty decisions until you implement it. Like it is, nothing is so urgent that it has to be done in the next 2 days. So go and take the time and actually get your shit together. But just generally, like what you're saying, David, is I completely agree. It's like, first thing, get everything out of your head, get it onto paper or get it into a computer, like get it into a system that you can look at. Then use enough time to organize that system into things that you actually understand, and that so you can see just how much is actually weighing on you. Then at that point, make a decision if you actually want to do it or not. Because that was the thing that I was really struggling with, and that this framework and this system allowed me to do, is that you can just say no to stuff. And even if you've said yes in the past, when you can see it all laid out, you can change the obligations. You just have to go back and communicate that. Just say no to a bunch of the shit you've committed to. If you can now see it's that the bottom 40 aren't nearly as important as the top 100, and just cull that shit out. And then probably my favorite thing out of the entire system that you have, David, is when you have this whole list, there's this like tag, or I can't remember exactly what you call it, but you can just put something into a bucket called maybe later. You don't even have to say, I'm not going to do this ever again. But like, sometimes I have these ideas. I'm like, I would love to create this, or I'd love to do that. You don't, like, if that just rattles around in your head, it still weighs on you. But if you get into a system and you give yourself permission, I'm not going to do it now, I might do it later, it just lets you, like, it's just giant breath out. And in the description of the book, you explain it as stress-free productivity. And removing that ambient anxiety makes a giant difference on your ability to actually make decisions. Because what I found I was doing is I was looking at the 5 things I could remember clearest and trying to compare those things. Whereas when you write everything down, and then you think about what done is and what doing is going to be required, you can make decisions a whole lot clearer than muddling all of that around in your head. And even though we can, do these amazing things with our brains, I just felt like, giving myself that space, just it radically changed the quality of leader I was, and the quality of my output of work. So the framework David has is just worth doing in every way. So maybe I might just wrap that one up there, David. But the summary is if you don't know where to start because you're struggling to manage your time, the high level is that you are overwhelmed, or you're not overwhelmed. You're like, you've got too much going on in your head and you haven't got it out. So the first thing you need to do is read David's book and then implement it. And what that looks like is getting everything out of your head onto paper, organizing it, and then from now on, making decisions based against that list by reviewing it every single week to make sure that all the new updated information is compared fairly against the rest of your life. How does that sound as advice for April Smith?
Couldn't have said it better. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll move on to question 2. I'm so excited to ask you this one, David, because I mess around with different softwares all the time. But this challenge is called, what is the best productivity tool for a startup? I'm a young founder, but I'm always looking to learn from other startup founders, especially those who have been more successful than me. As a startup founder, do you use a productivity tool or a combination of tools to organize your productivity? Are there any personal productivity tools for startup founders? I've never seen anything like this. I would be totally curious if anyone is building something like this or just has any advice. This is from Development Unlucky 11. So obviously, David, your framework and mindset is agnostic to tools. But when you dive into the GTD world, which, by the way, for everyone listening, there is a world of GTD. I didn't realize that this is a giant movement in the world. And if you haven't heard about it, that's crazy. But, there are probably meetups in your area. There are coaches in your area. There are guides on the internet of exactly how to use it. But I want to know from the man himself, like, are there any tools out there that jump out to you? Any good softwares that you've seen of people actually implementing your stuff in a good way?
No.
Really?
Well, no. Actually, there are last count, I don't know, a couple of years ago, there were over 300 apps that were built supposedly around the GTD model. And they're all list managers. That's all you need, is something that manages lists. I even know a number of high-tech people that have gone back to paper planners simply because they're sort of ADD or ADHD kind of people, and they don't have enough patience to do more than one click.
Yeah.
So apps are sometimes going to create more stress than they relieve because you got to learn the app. You got to figure out the heuristics about how you manage that app. Anyway, and that's fine. I capture low tech. So my low tech can't beat it. Paper and pen, no wires, no batteries, no Wi-Fi required. So that's my capture. That's not my organization system, but that's how I keep my head empty. And of course, one of the best tools I've had, over all these years is that little pocket thing. See, I got wasabi mayo, wasabi mayonnaise. Oh yeah, okay. So these get torn off and thrown into my physical in tray, which is right here at hand. This little piece of paper gets, I keep it desk side because God knows, even while I'm talking to you, I might think of something that's not about what we're talking about, but I don't want that to disturb our conversation. So I need to grab it. And then that goes into my in tray as well. So low tech capture. And, but my system is just a digital list manager. We migrated to Office 365, Microsoft stuff. By the way, there are a whole lot of Microsoft people that are GTDers. And so a lot of the improvements that Microsoft is doing almost daily now, trying to coordinate all the different businesses and apps that they bought to try to integrate all that into their suite, of stuff and trying to hook those all together. They're still fumbling with that, but that's okay. I just list manager. So I just use the tasks, the to-dos inside of the Microsoft, 365, just that. That's all I need because you can categorize that, so I just have I've got about 8 different categories of my list as well as a project list and a waiting for list. Those are all just kept there, but you could do that in pretty much anywhere. You could do that in an Excel spreadsheet. You can do that in Microsoft Word. You can do that anywhere you want to manage lists. OmniFocus is great. You use OmniFocus. Yeah. That's a great. And Ken, took a seminar of mine, got inspired to create OmniFocus. So and all that was really based on the idea. You just need lists. A lot of them have different bells and whistles, to it. But that's all you need. Yeah. So I don't have any suggestion about that other than if you're already using something as a list manager, keep using it, but apply the GTD process to it. A lot of people's lists are kind of to-do lists, but there's still, things on their list like mom or bank or ears or, whatever, but they haven't clarified what exactly they need to do about that. It's just a collection. And so they still need to put it through the GTD process to decide what exactly they're going to do about those. And once they make that decision, what's the action step you need to take? If you can't take that action right then, and of course, the 2-minute rule is gold. If you can do it, but once you decide what you need to do, what doing would look like, is that an email to send, a website to serve, something to call somebody about, whatever. If you can do that in 2 minutes or less, you should do it right then because it'll take you more energy to track it and review it than it would be to finish it right then. I've had a lot of executives, that I was coaching, think that was worth the price of admission, just the 2-minute rule. If they weren't doing it, they become like Teflon, in and out. Shouldn't stick around.
Yeah.
So, if you can't finish it in 2 minutes, then you need to, are you the right person to do it? And if not, you need to delegate it. And you could probably do that in 2 minutes or less. Shoot an email out, say, hey, Jose, could you handle this? And if you're still the one who has to do it and you can't finish it in 2 minutes, then you need to park a reminder of that action step you need to take as soon as you can, around your calendar and around your meetings and appointments. And so just some sort of list manager, especially one that you can categorize and subcategorize your action list. I mean, you could put them all on one list, but most people, quite frankly, Joel, have between 150 and 200 actions right now. Just real things that they need to do to move things forward, and that'd be a little unwieldy to have 200 things to look at to go when you go do an errand. You need an errands list so you can break out the errands that you need to run. You need a list of things, phone calls to make, and break that out. So, subcategorizing, and that's how a lot of people customize, and probably you have too. You've customized how you've set up your action lists and how you do that. There's some fairly standard stuff at computer, websites, creative writing, errands to run, stuff to talk to people about. And that's an important list. Here's all the things I need to talk to my wife or my husband or my life partner about. Or here's all the things I need to talk to my assistant about, or here's all the things I need to talk to my board about, whatever. So creating agendas that will hold and park the actions you need to take relative to communications. All those things just become ways of customizing. How do I organize and sort the inventory of all the actions I need to take?
Yeah.
Anyway, more than what you ask, or more than what they ask. But.
It's interesting, I was hoping that there was just going to be like the perfect GTD software, but it just keep it simple. It's just lists, So I guess from my perspective, I guess I agree with what you're saying. Like whatever you've invested in is the most important thing. Whatever helps you actually enact the GTD framework, I think is key. So I invested in OmniFocus as soon as I read the book, and now OmniFocus is like my boss. Like it is like it controls my actions to such a crazy degree because I live in it so religiously. I rate OmniFocus a lot. I think OmniFocus generally is like a pretty shitty looking software, but I like that because so many of the other softwares get really complex, and OmniFocus is limited in its capability. So it means that you just go in there and then you just have to kind of get very simple about how you implement this. And this framework should be simple. When I try to make it too complex, every time I try to make it too complex, I end up just stop doing it. So the more simple, the better.
Well, see, Joel, people think that software is going to make them more productive. No, it's not. It's probably going to reduce your productivity until you get it under your belt and figure out how you want to use it. But again, back to what we started with, this methodology is a thought process. It's an installed thought process, but the software won't do that. A lot of the software will help kind of guide you and give you some coaching about, well, you might want to, here's ways you could start to structure those kinds of things, especially if that software was built around the GTD model, and that those can help, but you still have to make those decisions. You still have to think. So a lot of people want the software to not have to think. Sorry. But as you said, it's kind of like your boss. It's your second brain. Yeah. So, it's like putting stuff in front of the door. It's just the door of your mind, not the door of your house, but the same idea.
All right. Well, we'll bring this one to a close. So development unlucky. What is the best productivity tool for a startup? There isn't one. It's just actually living out the principles of GTD is how you will become wildly more productive and effective in what you do. And the softwares to use that is, I guess the answer is kind of, it doesn't matter as long as you use it. But the more simple, the better. And the father of GTD still uses paper in a big way. So maybe you're overcomplicating it, and maybe you should strip back what you're trying to search for here. Because at the end of the day, I like the way you said that, is that software can't do the thinking for you, at least not yet. So,
well, and not only that, the first step to getting a clear head is the capture step, which is write stuff down when it occurs to you. And a lot of people say, well, I don't want to write it down until it's organized. And that's going to stop your process. You need to have the freedom to unload anything at any time, anywhere. Otherwise, if you think, well, I have to figure out where it goes before I capture it, oops, you're screwed. That won't work.
And Omni is awesome for that, by the way, for everyone. Like, it's so easy to capture stuff on Omni, and it's got an integration with Siri. So if you're on an iPhone, you can just tell your phone to add it there, and then it will be there when you go and look at your inbox the next day. So, all right, development unlucky, you've been advised. And we'll move on to our final question for the day. So this challenge is called, how do you stop thinking about work? Background. I'm running a web development agency with my partner for the last 6 years. I've always struggled with switching off from thinking about work at the end of a busy day or when I have a stressful project nearing completion. I realize that although this is productive, it's not the healthiest approach, and I need to make some adjustments. I also acknowledge that my social life, or lack thereof, may be a contributing factor. The combination of working together, having a young family, has made socializing a challenge. I'm from the UK, but we live in Thailand, and I'm not a fluent speaker. This, combined with our schedule, has made it difficult for me to form friendships over the years, and I've often felt that the lack of social engagement is stopping me from relaxing and switching off, and focusing just on the wrong things. I know work-life balance is one of the toughest challenges for an entrepreneur, but I'll take any advice I can get. Thank you from Latte Yen. So this one I felt like isn't, at a first read, I don't think people would think like, oh, GTD is the answer to this, but I want to throw this to you because I feel like you might have some strong opinions on this.
Oh, here's how I get stuff off my mind is what do I need to do to get this off my mind? The work is still going to be on your mind if you are not appropriately engaged with your work yet. So what do you need to do to appropriately engage? See, it's about appropriate engagement. Are you appropriately engaged with your health? Are you appropriately engaged with your cat? Are you appropriately engaged with your life partner? Are you appropriately engaged with your work? Well, if work is still on your mind, there may be some good reason for that. So if you're making progress, thinking, I don't make any distinction between work and personal. It's all the same thing. It's just like, what's next? What do I do now? What do I focus on now? And many times my best work is done on my reflection time. The dogs are asleep. My wife is asleep. I'm sitting with a good glass of wine in my easy chair in the living room. Lights are off and I'm just doing relaxing and just doing reflection. And many times that's where really cool ideas show up. And that's where this comes in handy. I'm able to capture those. Now, 80% of those silly, David, too much wine. But the next morning, oh, that's a good idea. What do I do with that? So people say, David, how organized do you get? I say, I get as organized as I need to be to have nothing on my mind. So, he or she or whoever is writing this, they have all that stuff on their mind because there's things they haven't captured, clarified, or organized in some trusted place that they figure they'll see at the right context or the right person will see in the right context. So it's not, one way I say this is you have to use your mind to get your mind off of stuff. So you actually have to think about stuff so you don't have to think about it again. But you can't just ignore it. You can't just, I have all this stuff to do. Again, we've talked about that in your previous questions. But, you got to say, what do I need to do to get that off my mind? See, there's a lot of stuff not on your mind right now. Me too. And most people, by the way, most mid to senior level people, and that person asking that question has probably got, typically the people like that I've coached have anywhere between 50 and 100 projects right now. Hire this vice president, research this software, look into whether we should hire this consultant or not, tons. And so, all that stuff needs to be categorized, needs to be inventoried, needs to be looked at. And then what do you need to do to get that off your mind? Well, you need to decide what do you need to do about it, if anything, and then park those results in some place you trust you'll see at the right time. It's like putting stuff in front of the door so you won't forget it in the morning. It's the same stuff. It's just taken to a much more subtle and sophisticated level. But you can't get away from that. There's no, you can't get away from it by hoping it goes away, by meditating, by drinking. I do all that. Sure. But that doesn't clear stuff out of my head. Either of those sometimes makes it easier to then think and deal with it. But, that there's the way out is through. You got to dive into that. And what do I need to do to get this off my mind? Because there'd be a lot of things that person probably even is not on their mind because they've made the decision about what needs to happen and it's on cruise control. So that's what you want to do is get all that stuff on cruise control. That's not necessarily, it's simple. It's not easy.
That is one thing about GTD that I think is so true, is that the premise is very simple, but it is hard to implement perfectly over and over and over again. So I feel like I said at the beginning, I'm in pursuit of being the perfect GTDer, but even when you're partially part of the way through, it just feels so much better. But the way I kind of explain GTD to people sometimes is that it's almost like you're emptying your head by just trying to remember everything. Like your head is so full Whereas if you have this system, and I know I'm sounding like a broken record at this point of the episode, but if you capture everything, every time you have an idea, you write it down. Every time you have a task, you write it down, and then you have this system that's organized into when you need to do it and stuff like that. That gives you like ample permission for your brain to stop. When you don't, your brain doesn't have a choice. It just keeps mulling it over because your brain is trying to work out when to bring it back. There was this one thing you said in the book, David, which said like it doesn't matter how good your memory is, your brain doesn't have a calendar function. So even if you're amazing at remembering things, you can't tell your brain when to remember something. So, like, of course you can't disconnect from work if it's just all in your head. If you don't have a system that you can trust that you can come back to. And I was having that same problem, I felt like I was constantly on. I couldn't stop thinking because I was constantly remembering the wrong shit. But when I got good at GTD and I was actually doing it all the time and I have this system in place, and now whenever an idea comes up, it just goes into my system and I think about it later. When I finish work and I want to relax, I'm relaxed. When I want to spend time with my partner, I'm spending time with my partner. Like I don't just have like these alerts popping up in my head that like red alarms are going off. That being said, when you've got a giant deadline, like you've got a giant deadline. At the end of the day, that's still going to sit on your head. It's like giant stress is giant stress. But I feel like, this just removes that baseline. And so on an average day, it gives you permission to give yourself a break. And that makes it a whole lot easier to switch your brain off when you need to.
Indeed. Yeah.
All right. Well, Latte Yen, I think there's a lot of good advice there for you. But, the TLDR is if you follow GTD and you get stuff out of your brain onto paper, it's a whole lot easier to switch off after work. And you will start to just naturally do that because you're not trying to remember stuff when you're trying to relax. It gives your brain the permission to give yourself a break. And that's all we have time for today. So that's our 3 questions. So we'll just jump into the best part of the show, my favorite part of the show, which is plugs. So, David, you've got something massive coming up. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about what's going on in your life right now?
We have a new book coming out. The title is Team, Team. The subtitle is Getting Things Done with Others. See, one of the big gaps, Joel, over all these years is people get GTD and they say, shit, I wish everybody around me got this. It'd make life and work so much easier. But I never had the bandwidth. I was too busy just dealing with the demands on just the getting things done for personal productivity. And I knew it was a big issue. And so, people would train themselves with GTD and then walk back into very dysfunctional environments, then have to use their own GTD practice to build a fence around themselves. So they weren't infected by everybody else's dysfunction. And so, I've got a partner, a GTD licensee in the UK, and he's over the last 10 or 15 years had a lot more experience actually than I have lately with dealing with senior teams that have been trained in GTD and watching how that affected their cultures. And he said, as opposed to let's see if we can close that gap. So we spent the last 3 years writing this book about what are all the best and worst practices about getting things done with other people. And so I think we created a great manual for it. So it launches May 21st. I don't know when people are going to be watching or listening to this of this year. And so, I'm excited about it because it's an evergreen manual. You'll use this when we fly to Jupiter in 2090. It's still kind of like GTD. They're universal principles that are going to be true. And so I'm excited about that. So, and it will be available. I don't know in Australia when it's going to be available. I think it'll be available right away because they're doing an airport version, which is in paperback. The US version will be in hardback. And it's already out. They can't announce it until May 21st, which is the official launch date, for the book. But you can find it on Amazon. Just go look and you can pre-order. Yeah. Whoever. But we like to support local bookstores, so go to your local bookstore, folks, and say, "Hey, I want Team Getting Things Done with Others by David Allen and Ed Lamott," and and that would be great.
Well, I'm excited for that one personally. I'm going to read that as soon as it comes out because we already make everyone in our entire team read GTD and implement GTD. So I'm excited to see the kind of nuances of the inter-team workings that we've been trying to work out to see what we can learn from that. So
Well, Joel, one of the things we use as a model, it's like if you're playing soccer or football out there, you can have individual players, and they absolutely need to be really good players. They need to know how to kick the ball right and perfectly. But if they don't know how to work together as a team, then you have individual stars that they're still going to lose, because that's a whole different thing about how do I now work with other people in some coordinated way. See, you could be really clear, Joel, about stuff. I could be really clear about myself, but you and I get together and we try to do something. We just added exponential complexity to managing our agreements with it. Are you doing that, or am I doing that? Who's yeah. So anyway, we tackle all that.
I love it. Well, I'll be reading that. On my side, for my plugs, honestly, go and read GTD. Like it's so valuable. It's definitely one of the most valuable books I've ever read, and one of the most recommended books I've ever recommended. So please treat yourself, read that, and then just read it once a year, because every year I read it, there's something out of it that I'm shocked that I haven't been doing for some reason, and I learn a new perspective every single time. So it's super valuable. On my side, as always, like and subscribe to the show. So get your phone out right now. 5 stars. I'll wait. Do the 5 stars, and then go to YouTube, subscribe, comment on all the videos. And then, as I always say, steal a phone and like and subscribe on their phone as well. It's an absolute treat for them when they open their phone up and they've got all of my episodes downloaded. But lastly is, thanks to everyone that writes in questions. If you have questions, send them through to podcast@joeldigitalplanning.com. And I have a booking link. So if you've got questions about GTD that you want to ask me instead of David Allen for some reason, hit me up. But tell me, what's going on in your life, what's going on in your businesses. If you've got feedback about the show, hit me up. Let's have a conversation. I've been having a bunch of those conversations recently, and I absolutely love hearing about how people find the show and how to make it better. So yeah, reach out. And that's everything. David, mate, thank you so much for coming on. I love your advice. I love that this is the second of my podcast that you've come on. So maybe we'll get you back for a hat trick at some point. And
Sure.
to the rest of everyone listening, thank you again. This has been another episode of Do As I Say. We'll see you all next week.